My name is Brother Zuhair Shaath. Introduce myself. I just moved here about a month and a half ago from Houston. My wife is actually originally from here in Pomona. My mother-in-law converted to Islam, and my father-in-law is actually from Palestine. My parents are ethnically from Palestine. I used to be a youth director in Houston, and I actually was raised in Virginia for most of my life. So I'm happy to be here just as everyone else is. And I love studying to prepare for these classes. It's amazing because last week our introduction was about studying and the benefits and importance of seeking knowledge constantly throughout life. It's nice because they say if you want to learn something, you learn it, you study it. If you want to master something, you have to teach it. So hopefully what we do is here we learn together, we share, and then through different aspects of your life, you learn and you understand things. And if you really want to get a good grasp of something, teach it, because then there's a little pressure. You have to understand it, you have to know the ins and outs of it. And then people ask you questions, and if you don't know, then you say, I don't know, I have to go do some more research. And so that's really what we kind of want to do here, is always continue to learn so that we can benefit others. Remember we talked about the benefits of knowledge is that it impacts others positively. Remember that? We talked about that last week for those that were here. So that's kind of a small introduction of last week. We talked about that. We also talked about the ways and our purpose of life, right? So God tells us in the Quran, which is our holy book, that we were created for worship, right? And how we do that through different means, right? Ritualistically through our prayers, our fasting, our charity, but non-ritualistically by working, earning a living that's halal, that's permissible, that doesn't cheat and oppress other people, so that we can spend it on our family as we're obligated to, as God told us to. So there's different aspects of that as well. So for today, sorry, could you please just close it? Yeah, perfect. Today we also have, because we're in the introductory phases, it's a little bit of a light class, but there's going to be a lot of discussion in it. Okay. Did you turn the on buttons on? Did they light up?
Yeah, we lit them on.
Okay. That's fine. Right. And again, as we talked about the purpose that we were created for worship. So today's class, we want to talk about an important thing, because a lot of times maybe get confused and things like that. What is the purpose of this ruling? Why is the purpose of that ruling? Why do we do this? Why do we do that? So today's class is just an overview of what it is that Islam actually came to protect. What are the aims and goals for Islamic legal theory? What are the aims and goals of the rules that we learn about, of the things that we're asked to do, of the things we're not supposed to do? Okay? And this kind of helps give us a better understanding of what it is specifically our Lord is trying to ask for us to do. And that way, when we come across something, it might not be spelled out in the Quran or in a hadith, which is the saying of the Prophet Muhammad. We may not come across something specifically within these different things, for instance, driving a car. They didn't really have cars back then. Doing this, doing that. So once we understand the aims and goals of what Islam is achieving and what it wants to protect, then we can use that for different scenarios that come up in life that maybe the Quran doesn't address specifically, maybe because it didn't exist back then. Right? So does this make sense? So, of these things, the first thing that Islam came to protect is the religion. Okay? There's 5 of these things, and again, when we come here, we really want to make sure we take notes, because these are things that during the week you're going to forget maybe, and you really want to maybe study, or another question comes up, you can look through your notes and you can go back to it. The first thing that Islam came to protect is people's religion. All right? And this comes about in a couple of different ways. First and foremost is that it came to protect religion in a broad sense, in the sense that there is no compulsion in religion. It is impossible and unlawful to force someone to become Muslim. And it is un-Islamic to treat people differently because of the religion, to discriminate against people. So because someone, and I grew up, unfortunately, a lot of times, when we talked about last week, how education helps us differentiate between law and culture. In certain cultures, if someone is Muslim, it's looked at as okay to cheat them, to steal their money, to treat them differently in business, to take advantage of them, right? And in Islam, this is completely unacceptable. If someone steals, it doesn't matter if the person they're stealing from is Muslim, non-Muslim, Christian, Jewish, agnostic, atheist. It doesn't matter, right? Because Islam came, and these are things that we are coming to protect. And there is no compulsion, there is no justifiable reason in Islam to discriminate against others based on religion. Okay? Does that make sense? So Islam came to protect religion, okay? Right? Other religions. Not necessarily just Islam, but we have guidelines and we are not allowed to do things to other people based on religion. Alright? Now how does Islam come and what it aims to protect Islam in and of itself? Right? So this means that if Islam teaches us that one of the aims of it is to make sure that religion itself has some freedom, that means then we should always pursue freedom of religion. Right? So as Muslims here in the States, if we see something happen and occur, right, and we know that Islam's purpose and one of its aims is to protect religion, then we stand up against it. Okay. If someone discriminates against a Muslim wearing a scarf in Starbucks, and just a couple of weeks ago we had a sister here, at I believe Coffee Bean, for instance. Someone walked up to her, she said, oh, thank you for not cutting my head off today, right? Standing up for people's religion and their right to religion is critical in Islam. So Islam then dictates that if someone does something like this, we're allowed to speak out against them. Right? If people lived, and for instance, there are many countries today where people, because of their religion, they're persecuted, then we speak out against it. Right? So in Islam, we have this concept of, and there's a beautiful tradition of the Prophet. He says, if you see something, and you can change it with your hands, then change it. If you can't change it with your hands, then at least speak out against it. And if you can't even do that, then at least believe in your heart that what's going on is wrong, and that is the weakest of faith. So when we see somebody that's persecuted because of religion or whatever, realize that Islam came to protect religion. Okay? Now we talked about the religion of others, but as well as our own religion as well. So when something happens to us, or an instance occurs to us, where something might transgress on our ability to enact our religion. So for instance, you know that your employer doesn't let you pray, then you make ways around it because Islam wants to protect your religion. Okay? I used to work at the mall. I used to work at like a video game store when I was a teenager. At the very beginning, whenever I used to get interviewed with people, when I'd have an interview for a job, I tell them, look, I'm a Muslim, right? I have to pray 5 times a day, and I need to pray 5 times a day. So, okay, then they would let me do that, right? You completely cut off this microphone. Sorry, technical difficulties. Okay. So Islam came to protect, Islam came to protect this, right? As a Muslim, I need to protect my own religion. I need to be able to pray 5 times a day. I need to be able to fast in the Ramadan. And if something is dictating to me that I can't do this, then I have to try and change my surroundings. I have to change in my lifestyle so that I can implement these things. Okay? Does this make sense? Okay. Any other scenarios where Islam came to protect religion? Another one, maybe something to think about this. Education. The emphasis that Islam has on education. What better way to protect a religion than through education? Because unfortunately what happens, the biggest harm to religion and just the understanding of other people is ignorance. And the best way to rectify ignorance is through education. Alright? Does this make sense? So Islam places a heavy interest in protecting religion. Okay? Anyone have any other examples of how?
The Prophet says to speak to the people who are not Muslim with the best of manners.
Good, so speaking to people with the best of manners. So during the time of Moses, right? Moses and the Pharaoh. And many of us are familiar with the story. It's also related in the Quran as well. The Pharaoh was oppressing people, right? And so Moses is now told to go to the Pharaoh and tell them, and when Moses is told to go speak with the Pharaoh, God actually tells Moses to speak with him kindly so that he may fear Allah, fear God, right? So that he may rekindle that kind of fear. So again, right, speaking out, making sure that religion is protected. The second thing that Islam comes to protect is life and preservation of life, right? So we talk about, there is a difference between physical and spiritual protection, right? We want to protect ourselves spiritually because, and you'll notice as well, when you grow in Islam, sometimes, you know, the hunger for your heart and the thirst for your soul is greater than your physical hunger and your physical thirst, which is what Ramadan, right, fasting comes to teach us, to discipline ourselves, right, to teach us that we do this so that we may come closer to God. Because now we start to realize and understand, you know what, if I can give up something that we have to do, eating and drinking, then I can give up things I don't have to do, such as cheating and lying and gossiping. Does that make sense? Hamid, is it good? No? Alright, alhamdulillah. We'll try and fix it. I'm sorry. For last week the video was like blank and black, but the audio was there. This week the video is there, but the audio isn't. So inshallah next week it will be hopefully better. So preservation of life. Islam and its rules. Sometimes you'll see a rule, it's pretty obvious, but what are the aims of it? To protect human life. So for instance, in Islam it's 100% unacceptable, 1,000,000% unacceptable to harm someone physically. Okay? It's not allowed in Islam. The Prophet, peace be upon him, says, "La darar wa la darar," that there is no harm nor reciprocating harm. So if someone harms you, you're not allowed to go back and take justice and vengeance. I mean, you can have justice, but not vengeance, right? And if someone does harm you, you yourself aren't supposed to be the one that does it. You go through a court system and you take it up in a legalistic manner, right? So we can't just go around just fighting each other with sticks, essentially. And you'll see that at the time of, in ignorant societies, a lot of times people take up justice of their own selves, right? And unfortunately what happens is justice turns into revenge and transgresses justice. So Islam does not allow this, right? And what is the aims that Islam is trying to protect? It's protecting human life. You know, we talked about education, and educating ourselves is the best way to combat these things. During the time of pre-Islamic Arabia, right, Arab family, they would, when they have a daughter, because it's a society that's tribal, they have to work. A lot of manual labor is required to actually survive. So if you had a son, that was someone to be stronger, they could do more work, etc. If you had a daughter, then unfortunately they used to look at it as like a burden, kind of. And some of them would literally bury their daughters alive when they're like maybe a half year old, whatever it is. Islam came to completely wipe out this ignorant custom. Okay? And what is the purpose? It's to preserve human life. Because if you can preserve someone's human life, then you can have dialogue and discussion, then you can come to rectifying these other things such as religion and mannerism. You can't really protect people's faith if you can't give them freedom and protection physically, right? Which is why when Islam was ruling in Spain, there was such peace between Jews and Muslims and Christians. And in fact, some of the Jews actually look at that as golden age in their thought and philosophical period. Because if you're able to protect someone's life and they don't have to worry about being endangered, then they're much more inclined to being open in dialogue. Does that make sense? So Islam really holds human life valuable. Because God is the one that created this person's life, who are we to go and take it? It's not ours to do that. Okay? Is there any questions on this? So, a lot of times, preservation of life is an underlying tone in maybe a legal code. So obviously, killing people is not allowed. Things that could lead to people losing their life is not allowed. Human life isn't, we don't own, even our own bodies, we believe that we are the creation of God and God owns us. So we're not allowed to take our own lives. Because we're not the one that gave it to us. God gave it to us, and it's something sacred. Okay? So when someone's like, well, how come suicide isn't, they're only harming themselves? No. These aren't our bodies that we own. God owns us. So we're not allowed to endanger upon this. Okay? Things that lead to the loss of life. So for instance, last week we talked about ways that things can be classified as permissible, liked, disliked, prohibited. If someone was to do one of these things and use it for an intention to do something wrong, then that itself becomes unlawful. So for instance, Owning a baseball bat. Islam doesn't say it's allowed or not allowed. It's fine. It's allowed. It's perfectly fine. Maybe play baseball, whatever. If someone was to go and purchase a baseball bat now with the intention of harming someone's life, then it's unallowed. It's unlawful. Does this make sense? So Islam comes to preserve and protect human life. Okay, these are one of the 5 things that it came to protect. The first is your religion. The second is human life. The third is your intellect. There is a tremendous, tremendous amount of emphasis on education in Islam. Tremendous. And anything that hinders education and harms someone's intellect or masks it is something that's not allowed. So when someone's like, well, why is alcohol not allowed? Why can't we drink? I know how to stop before I get completely drunk and maybe harm someone's life or whatever. Say no. Anything that temporarily or permanently changes and covers someone's intellect is not allowed. Anything that clouds your judgment, not allowed. So you know what? Maybe like getting high off of sniffing Sharpie permanent markers or glue or whatever like teenagers do, right? They say, you know what? It doesn't say in the Quran I'm not allowed to do this. Well, no. We know that Islam places a high value on your intellect, so therefore you're not allowed to do anything that harms it. Okay? This also means that, remember we talked about last week, learning things at their levels. So make sure Islam came to protect people's intellect and to teach them at their level. So some people may intellectually be at a higher level and some people might be at a lower level. And which is why when we teach people, we always teach them at their level. Right? Which is amazing because the Prophet, peace be upon him, when people would come to him seeking advice, it was amazing how every single time you see a narration of someone coming and asking for advice, it's completely different than the next person. Right? So for instance, one person will come to the Prophet, and this person, right, he's a pretty good Muslim, he's really well known about the Quran, he understands the Quran, he understands how to read it and to recite it and can teach it. Comes and asks the Prophet tells him, you know what, you should be someone that teaches the Quran. Another person comes and he's pretty good, right? He himself he practices often and stuff like that, but maybe he needs to step up his worship a notch because he's someone that's able to, right? He prays his 5 daily prayers, but you know what? He sleeps all night long. So the Prophet will tell him, you know what would be really good if you started to do? Waking up in the middle of the night and just praying a few units of prayer and then going back to sleep. Because the night prayer is so highly regarded, right? For another person, maybe anger management issues, so he'll come to him. And you'll see this in the prophetic tradition. Man will come and ask him, give me advice. And he said, don't get angry. He says, what? Okay, give me other advice. He says, don't get angry. He says, okay, fine, give me more advice. He says, don't get angry. Right? That's how much he would emphasize to this person because this person had such an anger issue. Right? So when we talk about preserving your intellect, speaking to people at their level. Right? So for someone just learning about Islam, maybe we don't delve too much into Islamic philosophy and all these deep, deep, deep subjects, right? No, we teach the basics. That's what we're trying to do here. Islam came to protect and preserve your intellect. And the method and way in which it was revealed does so as well. So the companions of the Prophet, they said that if the verses prohibiting alcohol were the first verses being revealed, none of us would have listened to it. So you look at it systematically, right? The first verses revealed were verses regarding morality and ethics and touching people's hearts, right? Trying to grab their attention to God and the afterlife. And what happens if you know about this guy and you know about these stories of people in the past. So what happens if you believe in them? What happens if you don't believe in them? So trying to get their intellect, right? And teaching them at their level. And then later on, applying other different legal aspects to it. So that's what we're trying to do here. Preserve our intellect. We're going at a pace. We're talking to people at their level. Okay? So this is why some of the things that are prohibited are things that cover up your intellect. Because it's sacred. This is why it's not allowed to prohibit people from learning. So unfortunately, in some customs and cultures, men are allowed to go and seek education, but women aren't. And unfortunately, this cuts off, them learning about the religion and prohibits and stifles their intellectual learning. And this is not allowed. Okay? Any questions so far? Uh-oh. Usually if someone doesn't ask a question means I didn't clarify that much. So, but that's okay. Yes?
I have a question. It's kind of ironic how we're talking about education, and the first word is revealed in the Quran was to read.
Yes.
How we didn't know how to read.
Yeah.
That's-
Yeah, so exactly, right. The first verses revealed to the Prophet was to read and recite. So he can, that's how much of an emphasis Islam has on intellect and education. Fourth is your progeny. What's progeny? Your offspring, your family relations. Alright? So this one we'll talk about, and we'll have a conversation on this later on, but today I wanted to touch on it. What are ways that Islam came to protect your progeny? Right? So sometimes they say, what's wrong with two consulting consenting adults committing, like, for instance, fornication or adultery, right? What's wrong with that? They're both adults, they're both of legal age, they both agree. What's wrong with that? No. In Islam, we have this concept of protecting your progeny, protecting your family, which is also why in Islam we're taught that women don't change their last names when they become married, because this used to be a method of how people would own others, right? So they would own them and they would change their names. And in Islam, you don't own anybody, right? So protecting this lineage and having an emphasis on lineage, so that the Prophet said that I was born through wedlock and not from like a one-night stand or from something incident like that, right? So we're taught to protect our progeny. We're taught that way. What are other ways we do this? We give our children good names, right? We protect their lineage. We protect their honor. We give them good names. We have children have rights on their parents. Parents have rights on their children. So any time you see something and it seems a little, well, what's the purpose of that? Why is it that God has such an emphasis on treating your parents rightly, right? In the Quran, you always see that God talks about treating your parents correctly and being obedient to them, even if, right? For instance, even if you converted and your parents tried to fight you to convert back to their ways, even if they did that and ask you to do the worst sin, right? To commit the biggest sin, to transgress the rights of God, even if your parents are asking you to do so, you still obey them and treat them nicely. Now, you don't obey them in the sense you do something wrong, but you still obey them and become their friend in this world. In the Quran, God says, فَصَاحِبُهُمَا, right? To give them the suhbah. In Arabic, suhbah is this close type of friendship. Okay? Which is also why sometimes when people convert, and if you ever meet someone, we ask them to delay telling their parents by a little bit, just so that they see the positive change in your life, and then I'm sure they'll ask you, there's something different about you. You walk a different way, right? You seem to have a little bit more of purpose. And then that's maybe one of the ways that you teach them about Islam. But progeny and family is extremely, extremely critical in Islam. Okay? It's extremely, this is your family. In the Quran, God tells you to قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ نَارًا. The first people that you'll be responsible, you're going to be responsible for yourself, but your family after yourself, your family has rights over you. You can't worry about maybe, for instance, a lot of times they're very willing to give and give and give and give. A man came to the Prophet and wanted to give so much. He said, what did you leave for you and your family? He says, I left them God. Right? As in I'm giving everything I own away. He said, no, leave some for your family as well. Okay? Because it doesn't make sense for me to go and help support another person financially if it means my children now have to go find somewhere to support them. Does this make sense? So your progeny, which is why in Islam we have such detailed laws of inheritance. Okay? Which is why, again, we talked about one of the reasons of marriage is that it gives a family bond. You look at the statistics of people that grow up in one-parent households or in not knowing their parents, right? Unfortunately, the statistics lean that people that grow up in that kind of a household don't always live the best kind of lifestyle. And unfortunately, it's one of the causes for people turning into things that they normally wouldn't have if they had a supporting cast. So, you can pull up a chair here. Yeah, just grab that. There you go. Okay? So that's the fourth thing that Islam came to protect. And these are some of the ways that it came to protect it. Alright? Any questions on this one? Okay. The fifth one The fifth thing that Islam came to protect is your wealth. How are some ways that Islam came to protect people's wealth? First and foremost, obviously, stealing is not allowed, right? So what else? Is that it? How else does Islam come to protect your wealth? Huh?
Not consuming riba.
Not consuming usury or interest. Good. Gambling, right? You're not allowed to gamble because you shouldn't be playing around with money like that, right? You can invest, that's fine, and there's ways you can invest in a halal way, in a permissible manner, right? But you shouldn't be playing around with, you know what, I have all this money, let me gamble it, and then all of a sudden I'm completely bankrupt, right? It's one of the reasons why gambling is permissible. Anything else?
Spending it wisely.
Spending it wisely, yeah. We're always encouraged to, again, educate ourselves on how to hold a budget, right? Good. It protects your wealth by purifying it, by giving charity once a year, right? Giving 2.5% on the interest, on the savings that you have, not on your, it's not just your income, it's not a tax. It's 2.5% on your savings, and it goes to poor people. It purifies your wealth. Maybe that portion of the money you earned wasn't 100% okay. Maybe you clocked in 40 hours, but you really only worked 35, right? So you see this concept of purifying your wealth. Okay? Alexis?
I think it teaches not to be attached to wealth as in my
Good. Not being attached to it, right? How does it protect your wealth? By not being so attached to it that is the only thing that consumes your life. Okay? So, let's talk about some of these things. So, for instance, interest. Right? This is a big one. Right? So, if someone has a credit card, does that mean automatically they have to go and close it right now? We take things at our level, right? That's what we're here to do. Take things at our level. If you have a credit card, we just ask that, you know what? We have some financial classes. There's a great group called Debt-Free Muslims. They teach you how to budget, build a budget, and get out of debt. Because debt can be very oppressive, right? Anyone with student loans knows this, okay? And right now there's an epidemic, right, of people in student loans, and they're trying to get legal action to get rid of student loan debt and all these things. It is a way for oppressing those who are poor. Okay? So when we talk about interest is actually a big deal in Islam. Because again, we're talking about protecting people's wealth. Right? Because if you can give someone security that, you know what, their food and their livelihood is taken care of, if you can protect that for them, then again, it leads them to living a better lifestyle, right? Which is why it eliminates any need for theft, right, and oppression. And unfortunately, greed is what leads to it, right? So these are the 5 different things that Islam came to protect, okay? And then someone also mentioned for wealth, what was it that I mentioned after interest?
Materialism, to not be
Materialism,
attached,
right, exactly. And there's a beautiful quote actually. It reminded me of one of the scholars says, why is it that we're asked to hold the world in our hands and not in our hearts? So that we can give it away easily, right? So we share it with other people. And there's nothing wrong with making money, right? There's nothing wrong with being a millionaire or a billionaire. Right? Some of the richest people in the history of the world have been Muslim. But make sure that you own the money and that the money doesn't own you. Okay, and that's the critical difference. Okay? So these are the 5 things that Islam came to protect. We'll go over them again briefly. And then we'll have, I guess, about 10-15 minutes of question and answer. The first thing that Islam came to protect, religion, your faith, other people's faiths. You can't force people into Islam. You can't discriminate people based on their faith. Islam came to protect it. Even at times of war, you're not supposed to be destroying things you can't destroy religious sanctuaries, you're not supposed to fight someone when he's praying, you're not supposed to do all these things. There are sacred months in Islam that are holy months, and that in these holy months, fighting is not allowed. Okay? So, Islam came first to protect people's religion and their faith, right? Whether it's other people, maybe it's Muslims, and education, educating other people. educating ourselves about Islam and faith. Second thing that it came to protect is life. Protects your livelihood. You're not supposed to do something that endangers your life. You're not supposed to endanger other people's lives, because life is something sacred and it belongs to God. He's the one that created it, and He's the one that takes it back at His time, because He is the most wise. We don't endanger other people's lives and play with it, right? So you shouldn't drive recklessly. Okay? This is important because these are ways that it manifests today. Okay? Intellect. Making sure you don't do drugs, because your intellect is sacred, right? We're supposed to be people that are fully cognizant all the time, aware of our surroundings and ourselves, so that we use the best judgment. And we can't do that if we have something that infringes on our intellect. So therefore, Islam prohibits us from doing things that endanger our intellect and others. So we don't drink, we don't do drugs, right? We never interfere with our intellect. Okay? Our progeny. Taking care of our family, our children, making sure that they're taken care of financially, physically, intellectually, giving them the best names, teaching them correct Islam, teaching them the difference between culture and religion, teaching them and protecting them, right? Protecting, and also doing so in a family environment that is permissible between a man and a wife, a husband and a wife, in a family environment, so that they're not torn between, family when they're growing up. And making sure that they know their family members, you know. It's important. Family is critical in Islam, which is why it's so important. And all the time, as you see it mentioned in the Quran, where God tells children to always be obedient to their parents. And we know that the rights of the children and that there are rights for the parents. So making sure that we protect our progeny and our family. And fifth is that Islam came to protect wealth, and does so in various ways. Either removing oppressive tools against those that are poor, such as interest, making sure that people earn livelihood in a permissible manner by not cheating and stealing and selling things that are impermissible. So for instance, if we know that consuming alcohol is not allowed, then we know that selling it is not allowed either. It also protects people's wealth around us, right, by telling us to give a portion every year on our savings, 2.5% of it, to those who are in need in terms of wealth. It's a duty for a Muslim to make sure that your brothers and sisters and other Muslims and everyone around you is also taken care of, right? So there are narrations of, people like Omar, who was one of the companions of the Prophet when he was alive. He would go looking, making sure that everyone at night was fed and rested and had the ability to eat, right? And he used to actually take it. He would be hurt if someone came and asked him for help before he went and asked them, because he didn't want to put people in a position to beg, because it's not a good position. It's very demeaning and humiliating. So he would always be proactive in saying, hey, are your finances okay? Do you have enough? Do you have food? Do you have living? Do you have clothes? All these things, right? And so these are the 5 things that Islam came to protect. So when we learn about Islam, what is the purpose of this discussion? So that when we learn about rules in religion and different verses, we read narrations of the Prophet, when we come across these things, we understand, okay, these are the reasons and the aims of what Islam came to protect. So if we're learning something, we have a trouble of accepting it because we grew up in a society and a culture that taught us differently, that this is okay and that's okay. Now all of a sudden Islam says this is not okay and this is what you have to do. And you can't just hoard all your money, you have to give it to charity, you have to do this, you have to do that. What are the reasons for it? What is the wisdom behind it? In a nutshell, these are the 5 things that Islam came to protect and to serve. Any questions? Yes.
So you give some really good examples regarding, how Islam is protecting everything, but those are big examples, right? Oppressing somebody, telling them they can't practice their religion, or killing somebody, or drinking. But there are also small ways that we affect these things.
Okay.
Give us some examples of those.
Could you give me an example of which
So, for example,
to
the
clarify?
oppression of religion, it comes to mind that we are in a society that criticizes a lot. We like to talk about things and we like to give our opinions. And sometimes when we give our opinion, we are pressing somebody else's view. So when you're telling me, I just love this, when you talk to people and they say my religion is the best, this doesn't, yours is this and that, and you don't understand that you are insulting somebody else's view. And
So that's a very good point, because in Islam, while we do believe Islam is perfect, right? We believe that it is a religion coming from the most perfect, our Lord, that does not give us the right to demean others and embarrass others and put others down. So I'll give you an example. We are not allowed, for instance, if someone was worshipping, let's say a Hindu is worshipping, right? We are not allowed to make fun of the idol or whatever it is that he is worshipping. Because what happens? Let's say I walk up to somebody and I make fun of their God. What's going to happen? He's going to start making fun of my God, right? And Islam came to protect religion and religious freedom. So we shouldn't do this. Because now the end result is God is now being made fun of by this person who didn't even intend to actually make fun of God. They're doing so as a defense mechanism because we humiliated them in their worship, right? So this is one of the ways in which when we interact with people, we should never make fun, we should never mock. Okay, it's not allowed. I'll give you an example of something that someone did, and it's not something we should do, and it's something very unfortunate that people just, because their sensitivities are a little off, right? Someone was, worshipping, or someone worships something, for instance, a Hindu worships a cow. And so someone was like eating with someone, and he's like, haha, I'm eating your God, right? Because he was eating a hamburger. Unfortunately, this is just not acceptable, right? And that kind of joking, it goes against the principles that Islam teaches. So it's not something we should be proud of. It's when we see somebody doing so, remember, Islam came to protect religion and religious freedom. Because through religious freedom, the best way for Islam to be taught and learned and understood is when we're accepting of other people's opinions. And when we have peace and we're protecting other people's freedoms. Because guess what happens? Once one person, their freedom is infringed upon and trespassed, and we don't stand up to protect it, then who's going to be there to protect us when our freedoms are infringed upon, right? So we always have to be vigilant to make sure that we don't allow these things to happen. We can have discourse and debate all day long, and we do that. Just earlier today, we had a United Methodist, we had some people from the church come by, we gave them a tour, we talked about some of the similarities and differences. That's perfectly fine. But we're not allowed to take it to a level of where we're mocking others and infringing upon their right. So, thank you. That was a good. Yes.
I just want to say about the family part and how you said to wait.
Mm-hmm.
But I think every situation could be different. If you know your parents, because when I waited 2 months to tell them, and then when they found out, not by me, they found out somehow.
Mm-hmm.
They were so disappointed. Their
Yeah.
hearts were really hurt because they thought I just lied to them, and then possibly they thought religion allowed that, and it just was really confusing for them. And the worst part of me, not that they say, but the worst part is that I lied to them, or I just didn't tell them,
Yeah.
or involve them in my life.
So I think that's a very good example because everyone's situation is different. I was just giving like a broad example. If obviously your parents, you want your parents to find out from you, because as she said, if you don't do it, then maybe they can see it as deception, right? And we don't want to give off that negative connotation that Islam allows for deception and things like. We don't want that to happen. But at the same time, there are certain circumstances where it is better for someone to wait, possibly, because then they know that if you know your family, you know it's better to wait. Then you don't want to seek argument in a sense, right? So for some people, it's better for them to wait. For some people, in your case, right, it's a different story.
And then also, one thing is when you tell your family, they'll come at you with things that you don't even know. So it's really good to really learn and be able to tell them, because then you're going to be, shocked in a sense when you're okay, wait, and they're going to think you're confused, that you're just being manipulated.
Yeah. No, that's true. I always encourage people to let people, because Islam is supposed to change you. It's not just about learning about this and that. It's supposed to make you a better person. So it's obviously preferred for them to see that positive change in life and then them approach you and then be like, hey, you know what? I do have something to tell you. A few months ago, I decided to take better steps in my life, and this is what I did, right? And then you teach them that way. Obviously, not every scenario is as perfect as that. But at the end of the day, as God states in the Quran, that no one is tested with something that they can't bear. And that's why we're here. Remember, Islam came to protect people's wealth and their lives and their religion. Because when you see somebody going through something like this, we help pick them up. We don't kick them while they're down. So if we see somebody going through this, we lend out a helping hand, which is what we're here for as well. So, any other questions? Dr. Regina?
On the wealth, I don't know if this is a good place to mention it, but Islam protects the wife's wealth.
Yes. Yeah. So for instance, my wife works and I work. My money is my wife's money. My wife's money is her money. Right. So like, Islam is oppressive to men. Right? No, I'm joking. Right? But her right, her financial right is that I support and provide for her. And whenever she makes money or earns a living, that money is kept for her. Now obviously, again, Islam is very flexible in the sense that I know someone, she's mashallah very, very like achieved a lot in her career and financially. So she's like almost like at a CEO level. So she makes a lot more money than her husband, right? In fact, I know some cases where it's the wife that works and the husband is the stay-at-home father. And Islam allows for that, but it gives you basic guidelines. These are the initial guidelines. If you as a family decide to work it out a little bit differently, that's okay. Like if the wife makes more money and someone needs to stay home with the children and they have special needs, that's fine. But Islam does again come to protect women's wealth as well. So, good point. Thank you for clarifying. Yeah, and heritage, exactly. Yes, Ahmed.
I was kind of wondering, as we were going through it, like a couple of situations came to mind where, where I was thinking that in order to protect one of those concepts, we kind of have to forsake another. So is there some sort of like, how would you prioritize them? Like, is there a certain order to which you think?
Good. So let's say, for instance, a part of someone's religion is that they are not allowed to eat pork. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Let's say a part of someone's life is that their life is on the line. This is a classic example. If you're stranded in the middle of the desert and there's a pig. How this pig got in the middle of the desert, I don't know. But it's there for this scenario. You're about to starve to death. Are you allowed to eat the pig?
Let's say snake.
Let's say snake. There you go. That's a little more like related. Because we're not supposed to eat snakes either. So you're in the middle of the desert and all you see is something you're not allowed to eat, right? Are you allowed to then, do you have to die now? Or are you allowed to eat it and then, So what's the scenario here? No. Preserving life is so critical that if someone was to put a gun to your head and say, become Christian or I'll shoot you, right? It's permissible because you're not doing it because you actually believe in it, but because you're trying to save life, right? So that's fine. Someone that's homeless, okay? Let's say someone's homeless and they need food. This is probably a little more relatable to our day, right, in age. And you walk inside and all the food is gone. The grocery store is completely empty and all that's left is like a ham sandwich, right? Are you allowed to now buy a ham sandwich and feed this person? Yes, because we're talking about preserving life. So every context is a little bit different, right? Some people might say, you know what, I'm willing to stand up for injustice, someone else's life. I'm willing to use my life to defend my family's life when someone intruder comes in. You know what? So there's not necessarily, I guess, an order in the sense, but I mean, every scenario is different. So it depends on the situation, right? Like, obviously, we would value someone's life more than their wealth. That's pretty obvious. Their progeny, for instance, there's discussion if someone's giving birth, okay? And there's complications. Who should you save, the mother or the baby, right? We're not talking about people's life and progeny, right? So Islam comes and there's deep topics and deep discussions, scholarly discussions. So depending on what situation, if there is a situation where both are at stake and they're at odds, that's where you seek education and counsel from somebody to help you through it. Okay? Question? You're stretching? All right. Yes?
I don't know if this is the right place to ask this. Regarding interest, I don't know if in general, Muslims are not supposed to, say, own a home on interest at mortgage. But there are people who don't do it, who really keep themselves away from it. But is it right for them to say that the other person is doing it wrong or they are committing
That's a good
something
question.
not right.
So if you see somebody doing something that you believe is not allowed, we'll just take it as a broader example, for instance. Maybe not necessarily this one. Let's say you see someone doing something wrong, right? Is it your place to go up to that person and tell them you're doing it wrong?
No.
Maybe.
If I know enough about
There's rules for advice giving in Islam. There are rules. If someone looks up to you and values your opinion, and you can do it in a good, kind manner, then you should advise someone in a positive way, right? If your advice is not going to be of benefit to them, they're just going to ignore you, they're going to do something bad, then maybe you should find someone else that they do appreciate their advice and do it that way. So remember, Moses and the Pharaoh, right? Who was Moses to the Pharaoh, right? Moses is now a prophet of God going to the Pharaoh, and he's doing so in a good way. Did the Pharaoh accept his advice? No. But you know what? That's okay, because Moses did what he was supposed to do, giving advice in a kind, gentle manner to stop oppression. So if someone's transgressing these things, you give them advice in a good, clean, positive manner. So for instance, in this scenario, if someone does have a house and they did buy interest, instead of walking up to them and saying, you did something haram because Islam teaches us not to use interest, you tell them, you know what? I heard you bought a house, mashallah, it's really nice. Beautiful house, I'm glad, By the way, did you know that there is now this Islamic financing option as well? And you give them maybe a brochure or a pamphlet. You do so in a positive manner. So we'll get to advice giving in a few sessions, inshallah, but there are ways. But it's not good for, God didn't hire us to be like, informants and checking on each other and check mark, walking into your house with a clipboard. Is this what you do? Do you do this right? No. We see something and we have the ability to speak up, then we should. But again, remember, at the end of the day, if you can change something, do it. If you can advise something to do it, if you can't, at least believe it's wrong, and that's the weakest of faith. And that's the lowest of faith.
That was my question.
So.
With the hadith and at the end, to change it in your heart, does that also allow like a dua? To do the dua?
Yeah.
This is.
So pray for someone to.
I think.
What do you mean?
Always when I hear this dua, at the end when I say, so he can change it by his heart. I always think he meant to do the dua. Is that
So you don't change it by your heart, you change it in your heart. So at least you know yourself that this is something you shouldn't do. Yeah, you should make dua for people, you should pray for other people, but it's not necessarily exactly what maybe it's referring to. So.
Which is something not to do.
Yeah.
Try to change it. Okay, it's first by your hand.
Yeah.
So supposing my daughter is not wearing hijab, so I'm not gonna hurt her.
Yeah.
No, she will report me to. Islam will not allow that you will hurt or harm the children. First, second, by your hand, and then.
By your tongue.
And then by your tongue, I'm not gonna also. I spoke a lot. She's not listening. So what's the third thing is, for me, I apply this now. I'll just do dua.
Yeah.
So which is my heart. This is what my heart is doing.
Yeah, and that's the lowest. Yeah.
Doing the dua.
Yeah. And that's fine. But also that you know that what's going on is not good.
Of course, I know.
That's what it means. Yeah.
That's why
So that's okay. Yeah. That's fine. Yeah. So, in your heart, and one of the ways you should do this is by praying for someone to alleviate their situation. I'll get to your question in a second. I saw somebody else's hand raised. Somebody else over here with a hand raised? I thought I saw someone. Was somebody else's hand raised?
In her example, to change it with the hand, does that mean she takes the hijab and put it on?
No. Because, again, remember, if you can change it with your hands, again, in a positive manner, then do so. If you can't, then you tell someone, right? You educate someone. If that doesn't work, then at least know in your heart that this is something that's not good to happen, right? So I'll give you another example. This is one that's also classically given. You're walking in the street and you see, for instance, something on the road, right? Now, for you to stop, if it's empty and it's your side road or whatever, you stop, you get out your car, you move it to the side, you pull over obviously first because you don't want to endanger your life, right? For you to do so, you pull it over, right? That's you changing something with your hand. Let's say you see a car accident right in front of you, in your rearview mirror it happens. Are you able to actually stop your car and then potentially get hit by somebody else?
Legally.
physically, yeah. So what you do then is you can't physically change it, you call someone. You do so with your tongue, right? 911, yes, I'm on 45 North and I just saw an accident on exit 9. So can you guys please send someone? Okay, so that's how you do it. Let's say you can't physically change something, you can't speak to someone to change something, then at least you know that what's going on is not right. And, like she said, you pray for them to alleviate the situation. So, those are the 3 steps. Yes, sister?
Regarding the hijab and say getting interest and stuff, doesn't that all fall into like your own personal need and your personal I'm not saying the person who doesn't do or does these things are anything less in the religion, like in terms of practicing the religion, but can't we think like they have their own personal need to make that decision or choice as well?
So again, remember we talked about how Islam comes in stages. And a part of preserving people's intellect is teaching them things at their level. Right? So if someone doesn't pray, for instance, you don't necessarily talk to them about interest, because now you're talking about preserving, teaching them, making them accustomed to the faith at a level that they're supposed to. Right? We talked about this last week, teaching people about Islam at a level that they're at. So if they're not at the praying level, that's the first and foremost level. And that should be the only level you should talk to people until they get that part down. Okay? Now, for this, we can talk about this side discussion. But remember, to talk to people at their level. Again, because there is no forcing people to accept or do anything, then you have to make sure that, because intention is what drives our worship. Right? Intention is what drives us. So if someone forces us to do something and we're not intending, we don't have a good positive intention behind it, maybe it won't count. So you teach people to do good, but you don't force them to do something. Okay, so that's the short answer for that. We have time for one more question. Yes, Ahmed.
Do you have the laws of inheritance like down memorized? Can you kind of?
I do not know.
Oh, you don't.
No, they're pretty detailed. Actually, they created. I think there's this online form where you plug in the family members and who the person passed away and what family members he has alive, and then it just calculates it like that.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So you don't know like certain little tiny specific.
I don't know the details for it. No.
What goes to the girls?
Sheikh Mustafa would.
Okay.
But it's usually not based on. So I'll touch on this as well, because a lot of times people use this as a way to say that Islam is misogynistic, it doesn't take care of women. So Islamic inheritance laws, it's different based on the family structure. So it says if this person has this, then this. If you have a sister or daughter, this person gets this much. In the Islamic legal code, sometimes in inheritance, the man gets more than the female. It's not because the man is better than the female, but because the man is obligated to spend his money, remember, on the female. And what she gets is hers. So if, for instance, my parents pass away, right? I might get more than my sister, but I'm supposed to spend on my sister, take care of her, right? And my family. Yeah. So I have to take care of that. So that's why sometimes the man might, in the inheritance law, get more than the woman. But that's because of the family dynamic structure, not because men are better than women, no, but because of the laws set up. Remember we talked about protecting people's wealth. So that's one of the ways of doing so. So that, yeah.
So what about like the women, they don't get as much, but then they have like husband who got
Yeah.
possibly, I don't know. I mean, not that much, but in like,
Yeah. So let's say if there is a female and she's already supported, she might not need as much as someone else supporting other people. So that's a good point.
They have to take care of his sister
Yeah.
in a sense too.
Yeah.
So maybe they need.
Yeah. So but the inheritance law is very legalistic. If you're good at math, you'll be good at inheritance law. You have to know your fractions, I can tell you that much. So, all right. Jazakallah khair. Thank you guys for coming. I appreciate everyone here. I guess, Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. We ask God that He grant us the best and always continue to keep us striving to educate ourselves and come closer to Him. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة. Oh, our Lord, give us the best of this life. وفي الآخرة حسنة. And the best of the next life. وقنا عذاب النار. And protect us from punishments. Assalamu alaikum, which means peace be with you. Bye. There are sweets, and we can have some further discussion. I just said